It's Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, so you know what that means. It's time for another episode of #EventIcons. Presented by Endless Events. The show where you get to ask the icons of the events industry anything. Use the question panel on the webinar to submit your questions. Or you can hop on Twitter. Submit your questions with #EventIcons. We'll be answering your questions live during the entire show. Before we get started, the more people we have watching, the better conversation we can have. So please help share #EventIcons on Twitter and Facebook. Just tell your friends to watch at www.event-icons.com. Now, without any further delay, this is #EventIcons.
Oh, hey folks, welcome to another fantastic episode of Event Icons, episode number 106. And we're going to be joined here today by some amazing icons of the event industry talking about new technology, engagement, and interactivity. Before we get into that, though, I want to introduce co-host extraordinaire, the man himself, a concentrated shot of ibuprofen in a bottle for me because I'm not feeling well today, but we're powering through. So I need his love. I need his amazing energy. Mr. Will Curran, the one, the only.
Thank you so much, Rand. But isn't ibuprofen technically create pain in other places to distract you from the real pain?
Not for me, man. Not for me. No, you take my pain away.
No, so happy to be here. So happy here. This is a really exciting topic for me. So I think everyone's excited, Brand. If you want to tell everyone, what are we doing today?
Well, like I said, we're talking about digital innovation, technology engagement, interactivity. And our guest today, we've got Charles Truong, who's the head of digital innovation for PixMob. We're going to be finding out more about what they are, what they do, and what they're bringing to the table. We're also being joined by Victor Bohnert, who is the CEO of Innovatis Group, and we'll be finding out more about what they're doing. He's one of the clients of PixMob, so he's going to bring an interesting perspective. Not only do we have the vendor, but we've also got someone who's used those technologies and is putting that technology to good use. So let's start off with you, Charles. Tell us a little bit more about who you are and how you got into the events industry.
As you mentioned, I'm the head of digital innovation at PixMob. How I got into event technology or the event industry is circumstantial, but it was an opportunity. I'm a product manager at heart. I like to create and innovate and create products. And what the event industry give me as an opportunity is a big sandbox. We feel like we can do an event and we can iterate easily from one event to another. It's a great place for innovation. It's a great place to try out and test technology. So for me, it's where I can create magic and make it happen.
And can you give everyone an idea, so when you say you're the head of digital innovation, what does that look like on a day-to-day basis?
On a day-to-day basis is basically a fancier word for product management. So basically I handle the klik product line, which it involves handling the roadmap, talking with the clients, also helping sales on a day-to-day basis to get up the product out there. So that's the thing with innovation. You can create something really cool that works in a lab, but it's not valuable unless someone's ready to pay for it and use it. So the work I say is not just creating and doing R&D and making a product, but it's also making sure we have the contact and the conversation with our clients and making sure they adopt whatever we're trying to put out there.
Epic. Nice. We're going to find out more about Klik later on in the show. But before we get to that, Victor, how about you? Tell us about you, how you got into the events industry and what Innovatis is all about.
Yeah, happy to. So, like Charles, it was more circumstantial than anything that I became involved in events. And I think it actually took me a few years to come up with the answer to why I do what I do. And I'll get back to that. But originally, my background's in campaign politics, which is nowadays I'm not sure, it's probably good that this is virtual. I don't have to hear the groans from people that I have any sort of responsibility for the mess that we're seeing today. But it took me a while to recognize, from that I left and began working primarily with associations, and specifically technology associations. And so I've been doing that for about 20 years. What's interesting about it, as I look back on that and why I've taken to this industry and this business, in campaigns, you look to give a voice to a collective audience, and in that case, it was the voters or specific voters, and help candidates understand what's important to them and craft solutions that benefit them. It's really no different with associations, and for my case, technology user communities. We look to give a collective voice to audiences, to consumers of some of the largest technology companies in the world. And so that's what I've been doing for a number of years. We founded Innovatis Group about 3 years ago. It was mid 2014, late 2014. And since we've done that, we had two very specific focuses. One, we started focusing just on technology user groups. That was our bread and butter. We liked the pace that they kept. And we had a firm belief that the pace that technology groups inherently keep could benefit other organizations and associations. And so let's challenge ourselves to, using Charles' terms, innovate at that faster pace and pass it along. And then the second thing is to challenge the norm. And I think that we'll probably get into this conversation throughout the next hour about events. Can be difficult. It's challenging to find that next new thing that's not just gimmicky, but can actually improve the experience of your attendees, improve their loyalty, and overall the outcomes that they get from the event. And so, right down to the root of our name, which is Latin for they innovate, or they rebuild. That's really what we've done, and I think that. A great point on this, if I may, is that over the past couple of years, we've become one of the fastest growing, if not the fastest growing companies in our space. And I think staying true to those kind of values has enabled us to be successful.
Oh, absolutely. No doubt that you guys are probably two of the most innovative people in the industry, and that's why we definitely have you guys both here. Obviously one of the things that attracted us to having you on the show, and we had to have you on the show, is everything going on with PixMob and the technologies that you guys are using and building. And, it's really going to be cool to hear it from the end user's perspective, but also the person who's building it as well. Can you give Charles, if you want to kick it off, start off by explaining a little bit what is PixMob? Because you guys didn't start off as this digital engagement platform. Obviously, there is engagement with the original technologies, but so a lot of people have probably seen the original technologies you first came out with at like the Super Bowl and the Olympics and everything like that. Can you talk a little bit about what PixMob is, and then also tell them what caused you guys to create Klik?
Yeah. So what people know us for is PixMob, the company, but also PixMob, the product line, which could be translated by pixels and mob, saying the first concept we had is how do we create a collective experience at events, more specifically shows, special events like you mentioned, like Super Bowl or the Olympics. So we created wearables, LED wearables that we could control centrally to make everyone at the show being part of the show. So like whether you're on the show floor, whether you're at the back of the stadium, how can we create an experience where everyone gets into it? And that was really our goal with the PixMob product line, is create crowd engagement and include everyone within that experience. I'd say the idea of Klik started about 4 years ago. We wanted to take this crowd engagement to the next level. So for us was, how do we engage the people, they're part of the show, but how can we make them actors and get them involved in making the show more interactive, making the show like more personal at an individual level. So the idea of Klik came from the idea of how can we make the wearable interactive and allow the attendee to have like extra functionality and allow the organizer to know what are the attendees doing. So the goal is really about creating an engaging experience for the attendee, but also for the organizers to know what's going on. So that was like the little premise back then, but how can we use our technology to make that happen?
Awesome.
Cool. And so, Victor, what made you guys decide to start working with these guys?
Well, I can't even remember the first time I necessarily engaged with Klik, or, if I did, I didn't know it was Klik or PixMob. It was probably, Will, like you said, at a concert, or, something where I saw the light up bracelets, which it's fun. It's a lot of fun, but it's not necessarily something that we would ever use. And so from our perspective, we try to tap into our audience, especially the partners that support shows, to understand what they're seeing at other shows. Helps us stay competitive, hopefully stay ahead of the curve a little bit. And one of our partners actually brought it forward to us just as an idea. And so we researched them, reached out to Klik. Heck, I think there was probably several months of conversations to truly understand what this technology was. And as we began to understand it, I think that we had an idea of how we could use it in a small box. But as we got to know the team a little bit more, really the application that we used it for started to expand and continuing to where we were starting to displace parts of our show that had become utility for us, but we were able to, Charles's point, turn that around to make them more strategic. And I'm happy to elaborate on some of those, but anything from like registration to lead retrieval no longer became something that we just did as a staple of the show. They now became strategic input for data for us and strategic engagement opportunities for our attendees. And trust me when I say we measured all of it for the clients that have used it so far. So from our perspective, it was, we liked the idea, the concept. It started as something very small and has really continued to grow to where we now see it as an important part of our engagement with these clients.
Obviously, there's a lot of talk about the value of data, that it's the new gold and we need to be, prospecting it. I'm curious to know, where did it start with you guys? Like, what was the original kind of measurable data that you guys were looking at and looking to get, kind of using the Klik? I don't know, Charles, would you call it a platform? Would that be fair to say? Okay.
Fair enough.
Okay. Yeah. So, what was the original kind of data point? And then how did it, like you said, begin to expand from there into the other parts of your event?
Yeah, so I'm going to walk you through my mindset, my thought process. And so when I speak incorrectly about the technology, Charles, again, this is where you just shake your head, just disappointing, because again, it's not the technology that's as important to me as what the technology actually enabled for our attendees. But Brant, to your point, we looked very small. We looked at this would be a neat way for one of our higher end clients. They had a little bit more budget than some clients, just to allow attendees to exchange information. That's it. So it wasn't necessarily, at the time, understanding what they were doing at the event. That came later. It wasn't understanding how we might use this for registration. That came later. And how we might use this for partner tracking. That came later. So all we wanted to do, and what we liked about this, was we used the wearable. I think it was the C2. It was a bracelet that simply allowed people through low-range Bluetooth to click their device. It lit up. They could touch bracelets, and they just simply exchanged information. That's the base functionality that we were excited about. Now, as we started talking about this and understanding more about what this technology actually could do, that's when we expanded our Klik interaction. And so by the end of our first engagement with Klik, we used it not only for the peer-to-peer engagement that I talked about, but as I've kind of teased up, we used it for lead retrieval with our partners, but also to understand what sessions our attendees were going to. And so by understanding who was in which session, it allowed us to have much more targeted marketing post-show. So if we were doing a webinar on a specific topic, we could actually send it to attendees in that session to say, hey, we know you liked this session, come to the next one. Or we could, simply by judging where people were throughout the event, understand the effectiveness of our networking events, our breakouts, et cetera. So when we ended up our first engagement with Klik, we had a tremendous amount of data. And I think we all know that data is only as good as you use it, right? I think the folly people have is they collect all this data, but they never do anything with it. We've been pretty disciplined about looking at it and coming back to it. Last thing I'll say, this was an event for 450 people, 430 people, I think, very small. But in the course of a day and a half, we had over 12,000 interactions that we were tracking in that day and a half, just with the 400 people, 12,000. So if you have any question about the effectiveness of this, it was huge for us. But again, we put a lot of thought beyond the technology into how people would use it.
Wow. Charles, what other data, that alone, all that data is like amazing, but what other sort of data can you pull from your platform?
So from our platform, like what we like to know is prior to attending an event, the more we know about the attendee, the more we can create segmentations and try to find patterns between different type of attendees. So we work a lot with the client, either from their registration platform or whatever information they had from the client with the CRM. We can also pull some of LinkedIn's and Facebook data to complement the profiles with the user's knowledge and approval. And then afterwards at the event, it's all about what have they done. And we're pulling data from our device, our own data points. So it's really about we want to be kind of like the Google Analytics of offline events in some ways, is trying to understand how all these attendees that are attending, where are they spending time, where are they bouncing, where are they sticking, and these sort of data points are generated from our proprietary system and infrastructure we deploy at events. So mainly the richness of the data does come from our platform and the data points we generate, but the profiles and all the pre-existing information about who's attending, we try to use as much as possible what is available out there and what the client knows about these attendees.
Wow. I'm curious. So you started talking about segmentation. I'm like a marketer at heart. So when I hear segmentation, that was like the early days of personalization, right? Now you can pull in and we get our names put on websites and they follow us everywhere. We get our account managers are in the chat bot at the bottom right. What does this personalization look like more in detail for the events? You started hitting a little bit on it, Charles, but also where do you see the future of this going? Where do you want to see personalization for events going? And then Victor, on your end, what do you want? This is probably the part of the wish list, send features over to the team, but where do you see this going? And where would you want to see personalization go for events? So go ahead, Charles.
For us is down to the single attendee. Everyone's attending an event, they invest money or someone has invested a lot of money for them to go there. And they want to have the best experience possible based on who they are and what they're doing. So for us, when we're talking about personalization, is how can I make knowing who you are and what you're doing, this event the best event possible? For us, I'm seeing a recommendation down to who you should meet, what you should attend, and this is this is what we have. And then also afterwards, and Victor pointed that out, is what have I done and how can I have relevant follow-ups based on what I've done, and how can I have relevant recommendation of what to do next after the event also, which should be down not just by personas, but down by based on what you actually done at the event.
How much work is it for a planner to put that together, to make that it just sounds like you would have to curate all those experiences, who you have to do, how much work has to be done to put that together? Or are we getting to the point where AI is smart enough to do it for us? We put together a list and it chooses from that list. How does that even work?
I don't want to do the AI sprinkling everywhere, but but
I love that term.
We need humans. Yay. But we work with our clients prior to the event, trying to understand, I think it's important to know, what are you trying to accomplish? And it helps us defining the different tags, interest tags, the different key information that we need to put a little bit everywhere for us to know, each data point we collect, what is this related to? And for us, afterwards, we may talk about AI magic, saying like there's a lot of data crunching afterwards based on what you've done and what was the type of activity that you've done, so that we can recommend something relevant. But it does take the human, and we need to understand from our client what they're trying to accomplish, so we can set up the system properly to capture the data accordingly.
Yeah, Will, if I could chime in on that though, because one of the questions I think you were teeing up for me is what's on my wish list for PixMob. And I was trying to think, I mean, I think the technology, we have enough to grow into their technology for the next couple of years, but I do think in the future, it is going to be some sort of AI capability. And, you know, if we stay on this kind of path of discussion, it's not just about the experience that they have on site, which I believe, and we should discuss, that PixMob really enables such a great experience on site in a number of different ways. But if we can automate how we use that in the future by, you know, I know setting, as Charles said, setting tags to one session they may have attended, but having a follow-up session that happens virtually after the show, or somehow tracking for the next show, how they might follow up, and automating that marketing discussion, or creating personalized plans for attendees. You know, that would be tremendous. I mean, look, some of the organizations we work with have, you know, over 150,000 members, and, you know, very diverse educational agendas. And for us to do that manually is just a monster task. So I think down the road, this sort of automation, which I'm trying not to beat AI into the ground, but, you know, that type of automating that thinking would allow you to maximize the data.
That's awesome. I'm imagining, you talk about this personalization stuff, like with the tags, is that, you know, right now you go to some of the more developed, larger conferences with hundreds of thousands of sessions, not hundreds of thousands, that'd be a lot of sessions, but a lot of sessions.
Hundreds.
And you go in there and you have to choose every single one. What if it was instead you showed up on site and maybe like you watched one general session, and based on it, you were like typing in some likes or something like that. And then all of a sudden it started curating a choose your own adventure amount of breakouts based on it. And you didn't even have to touch it. Like, I'm imagining that's not far off. Am I right?
Wouldn't be far off. For us is like what you're talking about, choose your own adventure, how you make that easy, natural. That's the sort of experience we're thinking about creating. You show up somewhere, you're interested by it, and then like based on the best timing, we recommend you to head somewhere else. You discover something that interests you, that you're passionate about, or it's completely different. Like, it's about taking the attendee and making them, taking them through the event and making it feel like it's a personal experience. And like, choose your own adventure, the books, like, you know, you go from like, you have options and then you choose, but in the end, like it's kind of like what we want to do with events. You show up, we kind of know who you are, you make decisions, and then we're trying to, from all the decisions that you're making, we're trying to make like the event better as you go. So that's definitely like in the lines of what we're trying to do.
That's so cool. I gotta let Brant talk and ask questions.
No,
I just keep going and going. Interrupting Brant.
You got my mind spinning about 8 different directions. So I mean, where I think I'd like to find out more about is, you know, you guys are talking about the personalization for the attendees. You know, how do you balance kind of the data that you want to get out of the event with that personalization? How do those things interact, and how do you avoid the kind of bad AI, for lack of a better term, that we see from some of the advertising sites where, you know, I bought a garbage disposal from Home Depot 3 years ago, and I still get emails. You know, it's very personal. It's personalized because I definitely was interested in a garbage disposal. How do you kind of balance that those kind of pulling forces of what the attendees' expectations are, what you want to get out of it, and yet not like pushing anybody's buttons too far, if that makes any sense?
Well, one thing for us that we always keep in mind is, though we want personalization, and maybe if we're thinking about it in a marketer's mindset, it's about like pushing the right recommendation at the right time so that people purchase. But for us, if we're thinking about how we want to use AI and personalization, is for us, we always keep in mind the attendee and how we can make their experience better. So for us, it's not going to be about sprinkling AI so that we bombard him with it. like the data is going to serve to make the user experience as smooth and as personal or as relevant as possible. So that's our goal. And keeping that in mind, then we will make sure not to send you ads for garbage disposals for 3 years in a row. That's where we're thinking about the moment and being relevant. And by design, that means we're going to have to make choices. Not because we can do something that we'll do it. We'll just do it if it's like relevant and pertinent for that event, for that attendee. So,
yeah. And I think for us, it is about management. And I would encourage everyone that considers this or any sort of technology like this, compartmentalize the value you're going to get from it. So there's that sort of attendee behavior tracking that we do to better the event itself overall. And so there are data points, Brant, that we collect that no one will ever see. And we may only use to support certain things. So for instance, we can tell how much time someone went and spent in a general breakout session room. And so we know if someone walked in, walked out, it's probably not relevant to them. Or we can track that someone was in there for, 45 minutes, but, we only got a handful of surveys. Things like that can help, really validate as opposed to provide some sort of discrete information for the show. So that's useful. Then there's this idea of personalization. And I think what Charles was talking about is what excites me about it is when someone's truly immersed in an event, or you create that immersive experience that they could be in a general session room and make comments on social media or favorite a session. And then we can actually suggest a plan to them. I would argue that that's really benefiting them and their experience on site. The post-event, we do it to drive interaction, there's no question, but we don't use it for that hardcore marketing per se. We do want to get better about it, but again, our approach is not to necessarily drive the sales from it in your example, but it's really to drive that engagement, because we know our members, our customers, our members, they could join a number of other not-for-profit organizations, a number of other user communities. And so for us, making sure they have a very personal experience that, by the way, evolves with them, because why they signed up today and why they came to an event today, hopefully, will be very different than why they sign up in 5 years. That's important to us. And so we've got to continually, drive that new relevance to them. So I think personalization, as I'm using it, might be a little bit different than just a marketing term.
So my favorite part about looking at the name badge that you guys create is that it lights up, because naturally I'm like a lighting person. It looks like a name badge from the future. So we talked a little bit about, obviously it does location tracking, so we can see what rooms people are going into. But I know one of the big things is you aren't using RFID technology. I know, Victor, you mentioned Bluetooth Low Energy. Is it primarily Bluetooth Low Energy? What sort of technologies are going into this? And how easy is it for someone to get this set up? Is this something where, you guys have to bring a full team to get this set up? Or, and Victor, talk a little bit about your experience as far as like scaling into using this too. I'm just curious, like how easy is it for someone to get started using a platform like this?
Yeah. So, Charles, you're happy to take first crack, and then I'll give my answer to it. I mean, it's extremely easy, but there's a human factor that you need to pay close attention to. But in terms of the low energy Bluetooth, Charles, you want to talk about that?
Yeah. So for us, when we chose that technology, is that, there's RFID out there. There's apps that are already out there. We chose that technology to make sure that we would have an interactive badge that everyone would be part of the experience. So that's why we've built this interactive badge with Bluetooth capability. And what Bluetooth Low Energy brought us as a capability is the devices can talk to each other, they can talk to the infrastructure, so that bi-directional aspect to the technology really allowed us to start thinking about interactions. That's for sure. When it comes to how easy it is to set up, like we come from the event industry, so we've done stadiums, we've done like very large event. We understand that you need to set up quickly, and you need to set up almost seamlessly in a sense. So for us is battery operated setup that we can deploy very quickly. Some infrastructure that we need to, temporary infrastructure we need to lay on the ground for the event. But usually it takes a couple of days prior to the event for our team to set up. And it all comes to working with the client in preparation to those couple of days for them to set up. For us, we're seeing this as easy to deploy because we do help deploy. Eventually in the future, if we want other people to deploy, like this is a use case we're keeping in mind, but we're trying to make it easy for people to innovate. So that's why we have, like, we send like a couple of people on site to make sure everything is set up quickly and goes well.
Yeah, and I've built on, and not even figuratively, I mean, literally, we built concentric circles from a strategy. We said, what's the core takeaway we want? What do we want from this technology? And then we built from that things that this technology could do. And the reason I start there is I think it's important with any technology is truly understand what you're looking for. Are you driving something new for your audience or for your event, or is it gimmicky? And so that's why, the light up thing, well, I smiled when you said that because we absolutely used it and we had a blast with it and people loved it. We did big events and they would flash up. And we used it as even as warnings or, hey, it's time to go to a general session. So we used it as notifications. But that was just a function that we got with everything else. So what we did was we decided what we wanted the technology to do. We then selected the form factor because we've actually used a couple different form factors from PixMob. We've used the badges and we've used the wristbands as well. And it just really depends on what we want out of it. But all that aside, I think one of the things that we did well, and I mean we collectively with PixMob and the Klik team, is the human factor. We had some folks on our side that were responsible for how the technology was being used from an interaction perspective. So nothing to do with the technical capabilities of the solution, but just how it was being used and what we wanted out of it. They seamlessly integrated with the Klik team, or maybe the Klik team seamlessly integrated with us, I'm not really sure. And the fact that I can't define it probably is a testament to how effective it was. And they managed the technology to make it work. And so we not only, I think, had very solid documented strategies for how we were going to use this on site, but we also invested in signage and copy in our on-site guide, mentions from the general stage, so that our attendees knew how to use it and our attendees knew how this could benefit them, because we didn't want them to come in and think that this was just a light up gimmick. We wanted them to know that, hey, this is something that's really cool that could benefit you, enhance your experience. And again, when you see the interactions that people had, it was just through the roof, and you can actually attribute spikes in activities to when people were learning about the Klik device and what it could do. The other thing I just want to throw in here that might be a bit off topic, but to me it was an unanticipated outcome, but it was so exciting to see. It was something I never even thought about. But if you think about people that go to big shows, and especially people that don't know anyone, they kind of wander around. They're not likely to go up and talk to someone. These Klik devices, it was such a fun and an easy icebreaker that now if I didn't know, Brant, I'd walk up with you, just click the bracelets. It was fun. Conversation struck up, and we started seeing people, just really get into this to where they were, driving hundreds, if not thousands of interactions. And, some people may have done it just to get points, and we did have some prizes awarded to it, but there were a lot of people that came up to us and said, hey, I didn't really care about the points, but I met a lot of people I probably wouldn't have introduced myself to otherwise. And we found it to be a great icebreaker. And on that vein, and I'll stop talking about it, I do want to come back to it before I leave. We should talk about this lead retrieval, because I believe that what we did with Klik and some of the things that we at least tested at one of our events is really going to change how we work with partners on site. And for most events, partners and sponsorship drives over 80% of revenue. And I think looking at them as a very important stakeholder in the events that we put on is important. And some of the work we did with Klik, I think, is really going to open up doors for that.
I definitely want to come back to the lead retrieval portion, but
Yeah.
before we do that, I think you brought up a really good point about people utilizing a technology different than you expected them to.
Yeah.
And so obviously, like, you have things like the badges being put together to trade information, being able to track what sessions they've been to. What ways did you see the technology used? And I'm going to shoot this one over to Charles, because you're like the guy in charge of this. This is kind of your baby. What ways were people using it that was kind of surprising? You're like, I never thought about using it that way. And you guys were like, okay, we have to integrate that as a feature, or that's a surprise feature. Kind of like that you say it's a bug, but really it's a feature kind of thing. Talk a little bit about that.
I would say that it's a bug, and then we made it a feature. But I'd say it's just how it's fun to see how attendees when they use the technology, and sometimes they tell you in a very blunt way, but like, well, we can exchange contact. We might as well be able to like click in the air and be able to to get some information and so forth. So I think it's not necessarily like how they use it that surprised us, but it's just naturally how we're trying to see what natural interaction people think that this interactive badge should do. And it inspires us a lot about like what's to come. Because if they do it naturally and they feel like, it should be just one line of code to click and I should receive like, the slide that was on the screen, like, it gave us inspiration for bookmarking. One of our features for us to know like, okay, they like something, they click, we store that. So it's oftentimes inspiration, I wouldn't say. It's not necessarily that they feel limited by the feature, but they feel like they know what this device should do. And we listen to it because it feels natural. If a lot of people are telling us it should do this, then like, we tend to listen.
I love it. Victor, what about you? What was like a more surprises that you saw when utilizing the technology?
Yeah, I think it definitely was the. We'll talk about again. I'm dying to talk about this lead retrieval, but it was a more passive.
Let's do it. Let's talk about the lead retrieval.
It was the more passive. What we would say is passive. So I already mentioned the fact that it was a great icebreaker, and you saw more interactions. You didn't see people just wandering around, sitting by themselves. You saw people laughing and enjoying it, and for us. That was great. It was just great. And I think it helps personalize that experience. But it also makes you realize that what happens, especially at large shows, there is a lot of lurking that goes on, right? People kind of, and it's not that, I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just that people don't necessarily feel comfortable talking to a stranger or, walking up to a booth on a trade show because either they, don't want to get stuck talking to a salesperson or it's not necessarily relevant to them. And so we, with Klik's technology, saw a tremendous uptick in what I would call that sort of passive engagement. And it's purely my term. I don't know if Klik likes it or hates it, but I talked to them about passive. Fair enough. Passive lead retrieval is what I call it. And so just like I mentioned that it's a great way for people to walk by and introduce themselves to a complete stranger. But we also worked with the PixMob team to at least, test what I call passive lead retrieval, which means that we were able to zone the booths on our trade show floor. And so think about how I engage at a solutions exchange or trade show, and probably similar to you is when you walk around, you kind of warm up and you might look at a booth from a distance, but never truly go in and engage. And so you never get that connection if you're the partner. Well, with this technology and the proximity tracking that it allows, we can actually set different parameters. So if someone's hanging out outside a booth for 30 seconds or for a minute, maybe you didn't scan them because they were too intimidated to come talk to you. Maybe your sales team was engaged with someone else. Maybe they had somewhere else to be and didn't have time to connect. Who knows what it is, but we do know that the people that spend time kind of looking at booths from a distance, could be a valuable connection for you. And so we worked to sort of help our partners understand who those folks were. The other thing, and we all know this, it's justifying the value of your event. and really making sure we cringe sometimes when you look at the exhibitor feedback, because you think you're going to hear not enough time on the show floor, not enough traffic, right? And so we hear that. Well, what I love about this and with this passive engagement, we can tell the partners, hey, did you know you had X number of people that were at your booth for an X period of time? And so if your sales teams are going back saying we only got a handful of leads, you might want to relook at your engagement. So we can actually quantify immediately, quantify almost immediately what the value was of their interaction on the show floor. So all those things to me, we knew that people would like the clicking. We loved the real-time engagement. We loved the timeline. But it was these types of things that allowed us to almost instantaneously show the value of being at the show. That to us was fantastic.
Well, I can see why you were interested and you're excited to talk about that. It's fascinating technology when you start thinking about, and then just using the phrase that you used before, kind of the concentric rings of, hey, these are the people that kind of lurked around your booth for a while. These are the people that got a little closer. These, I don't know how finely tuned the system was, but it starts to definitely put out some interesting ideas of different levels of measuring engagement and, whether or not someone is a hot lead or a cold lead. Maybe they stopped by the booth. They were only there for 5 minutes, but they lurked for 20. Right. So, and we're, watching all of the videos and stuff in your booth. I want to start taking us toward the future of where this technology is going and what the possibilities are. Whenever I start thinking about Bluetooth Low Energy and these types of devices, and I know you guys are focused mainly on the interaction and the interactivity and the engagement side of things, but where my mind starts to go is things like, indoor mapping, intralocation. Mm-hmm. Is that something that's on the product roadmap? If not, what are the things that are? What do we see as the future possibilities of this type of technology?
Yeah, I think you're touching the right point. Like, yes, we do the deliberate engagement, and we encourage the deliberate engagement of people exchanging contacts, people bookmarking what they like, people interacting with content. But like the big advantage of Bluetooth Low Energy is the whole passive tracking aspect. And for us this is something that we have in our product line, and it's to the capability to map out all the venue and be able to see where people are going, where they're spending time. We cut down to the booth, but we can track a very large zone. So for us, that's what the technology enabled us to do, and be able to understand the behavior that is deliberate for sure, because it gives an indication of what people are doing, but the non-deliberate also, because not everyone will be engaged in a interaction point of view, but they will definitely be engaged in a presence point of view, because they were exposed to the content, they were exposed to other people, but they were not just not into doing the deliberate actions of engagement.
And I'll blame the cold medicine for not being very clear. I guess what I'm curious about is for the attendee, being able to look at your phone or something along those lines and see, where am I in reference to the rest of this location? Okay, so I wasn't sure if you looked like you were talking more about the data points from the planner perspective, but
from both perspectives. Okay. Cool. Yeah, exactly. The future is there, and one thing is, if we track, it's good to let the attendees know that they get value out of it. Also for us is if we track and we do some sort of wayfinding for the attendee, is you're here right now and your next session is over there, and the floor plan will indicate to you where's your next session. And this is definitely a
the Google Maps alerts. You are 5 minutes away.
That's what I can't wait for. That's what I can't wait for. Yeah, it's I want to get to booth 347. Here's the fastest way to get there.
You don't have the way, but you can figure it out.
But Victor, on your end, what do you see the future as this from my attendee perspective, as well as planner's perspective? But what do you see the future of this going?
Yeah, I don't know that for me it's necessarily this idea of mapping. I think it's useful, but if you look at the ability for you to monitor flows and interests, I think it's a couple of different things. One, it's pushing maybe agendas to people, again, not to steer them in any certain direction, but help them recognize things that they may not necessarily recognize. So for instance, you select a session at any event based on the title, the speaker, and probably a brief abstract. And so if we're not grabbing you on at least the title and the abstract, we may miss you, and you may miss out on a session. So going back to this idea of tags and recommending sessions, I think would be great. I also think that using the data more real time with communications could be interesting. So for instance, saying something like session 304 is filling up. If you're interested in this, you got to get there right now. Or, hey, don't miss a pop-up session that we may have. Or I love the idea of even crowdsourcing, whether intentional or unintentional, crowdsourcing the different topics. So you might actually sit in a general session and go through 2 or 3 different topics and let the crowd select which one they want to say, and say, okay, great, we're going to have this session in X room at this time. So being able to adapt real time based on attendee interest at that moment, I think would be fascinating. And I'm not necessarily sure either how to do that from a technology or even from a meeting plan or responsiveness just yet. But, looking beyond the headlights, I think that's the way to go, so that you effectively plan maybe even 3,000 different conferences or 3,000 different conference experiences under one roof. But I think that tagging attendee data and attendee interest real time will help you have that relevance that we're talking about.
But one thing also, and it's not in the distant future, is what we've done already at one of our shows is we're talking the advantage of knowing where people are, is we've broadcasted the heat map of the event during the event, sort of to create the fear of missing out aspect is like, it's all red over there, but I'm here. Why is that happening? So like the organizer wanted to make sure that people could see, like, where are the hot spots, either to go to them or to flee them. So that's like already here, and like, we've used it at an event, but also as Victor mentioned, maybe not in a automated way for everyone based on their interest, but we've already been using in terms of using the real-time data to help with traffic flow, or to recommend, like, if everyone is at the general session and then afterwards they're splitting up, and then you want to fill out like one of the zones that you feel like there's not enough people over there, and then just send a push notification for everyone to steer them in that direction. It's the type of real-time action that we're doing with our clients to help them with just simple logistic or crowd movement.
We've got some questions coming in from the audience, a couple of really good ones here as we start to wind down. So if anybody else has any, please be sure to send them in so we can get them in before the end of the show. Use the Zoom Q&A panel, use the chat, whatever you want to use to get those questions in. One came in from Reed Stockman, and you mentioned early on, and I'll just give you an opportunity to potentially expand, that this is opt-in technology. But the question was specifically, obviously we see all the benefits, but what about privacy? What are the other options for different levels of engagement as we go? So if you want an opportunity just to expand a little bit on that and perhaps answer some of Reed's potential concerns.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's not only Reed's, it's general concerns. Privacy for us is, first of all, it has to be clear, and it is within our privacy policy for all the attendees to understand what is being shared and how. So definitely we're super transparent about that. And we want to let them know that we know where you're going, and we know like who you're interacting with. And that has to be explained like from the get-go. And then afterwards for us right now is, we don't have any marketing ambition regarding that data for now, and we keep the attendee as the focus. So the data we're using is definitely to create a better engagement experience. And one thing that we need to reassure all our attendees is what is being shared at a personal level. So they are in control of what they're sharing as individuals. So like me, Charles, I'm exchanging contact with you, Brand, and that is deliberate, and they know. And all things non-deliberate, that they don't know about. Like, we need to protect that and ensure that we only share that information in a non-identifiable way. So like as a very, how can I say, like highly aggregated data. So we understand patterns and we understand segmentations, but not sharing like individual actions for other people to track.
I love that. And Victor, I was curious on your end from the planner's perspective, how do you communicate that to your attendees? Are you sending out email blasts? Is it just signage? Are you saying signs like, be aware, wearing this badge collects data? How do you communicate the privacy, that the information, so people knows what's being shared, but also letting people know there's an opt-out? Like, how does that all work on your end?
Yeah, and there's no question this is the number one challenge or concern that gets raised with this. But we go through, as Charles said, we have the opt-in or the terms of usage, which, candidly become a bit like the Apple terms of usage. You're going to accept it to get your music, just like people are going to accept this just to get their badge. And so we try to go a little bit further. So, a couple of thoughts on that. First of all, how you use that data and the repercussions for how you use that data belong solely to each of the organizations. And we take that very seriously. We protect our member data very tightly. And so some of the data I even mentioned to you never goes out public. So we don't necessarily share your contact information, Will, or your contact information, Brant, with our partners. But we use the information collectively to, like I said, quantify the value of engagement, or even track patterns, as Charles mentioned, throughout the event to better our show. But in addition to that, we do have signage, just like we actually had 8-foot signs that said, heads up, your picture may be taken while you're at our event, and heads up, you are being tracked as you walk around this show floor. We have contingencies for someone that may not be interested. We would remove them from any data sharing. Post-show, we subscribe any of this data to the same usage and opt-out policies we have for all of our marketing materials. So, it's not one solution. You've got to hit it in multiple ways. You've got to hit it live on stage. You've got to hit it with signage on at the event. You've got to hit it with your terms and conditions. And, quite honestly, I'd say those terms and conditions are probably the least effective because, again, we all click them and they're so cumbersome that you don't often read it. But it helps, I think, to fully disclose it from the main stage and fully disclose it with signage.
Well, we got another question from the audience. That was a fantastic question and yeah. well answered as well. And this is probably the hardest question that always gets asked and frequently gets asked, especially when it comes to technology. We all understand that every event is different, everything, every venue is different, all of that kind of thing. But can you give us any kind of ballpark pricing on how this type of technology, are we talking $1 million? Are we talking $1,000, $100,000? Understanding total ballpark. Like I say, it's the toughest question that anybody ever gets asked.
So $1 million.
$1 million.
$1 million.
Perfect.
It varies, like you mentioned. For us, the range, and I'd say it's going to be like per attendee, which if it can gives a reference, is it's going to vary. I'd say like for very large event, we can be like under $10 per attendee. For sure, like there's fixed costs and there are the variable costs when we deploy. It's like can be as low as like right under $10 per attendees, and it goes up to about $30 per attendee for smaller events. And our range, I would say, like where we hit the range of events we're doing is like about 1,000 to like 30,000, which we did. So it's going to vary on volume for sure.
I imagine it depends on the features that are engaged and the reporting at the end of it. So obviously there's a lot of different factors that go on there. And it's not a paper badge. It's it's this technology.
The coolest looking badge I've ever seen.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that for a minute. And by the way, post show, I'm happy to take any any questions on this. We obviously can't share specific details, but we can talk about, the pricing ranges that we experience. But, for us, we love the potential of this. And I mentioned when we started that we found ourselves looking at things that are simple utility for most shows. And evolved them to be more strategic. And when we did that, we were able to offset the actual cost of the klik engagement by removing some of those things that were duplicative or no longer necessary. Like registration, believe it or not, for a very large event, we completely switched out our reg provider to make klik the focus of that. So we got rid of all reg supplies, all the registration functionality that we needed pre-show, although we still had it just in a different format. And we were able to reallocate those costs to offset this. So I think the best way, not knowing much about the person that asked the question or the event that they run, I think the best way to answer it is affordable. Trust me, our clients are all not-for-profit organizations. They found a way to do this. I think it goes back to what we said, is understand how you're going to use this technology, understand where there might be overlaps in other solutions that you may have on site that you've deployed on site, and see if you can maybe change or even eliminate them to free up the opportunity to use this type of technology. And then I think you'll find that the actual net impact on this is even less than the $10 that Charles was talking about, once you factor in the things that you're potentially able to remove. My only other thing is I'd answer that. I'd use that answer for any question about any new technology at an event. If everything you do just becomes a bolt-on to things that you do today, you're going to find yourself with a bunch of disparate systems that don't talk to each other, that are kind of, gets you halfway there. I think the best way to look at it is understand what you're looking to get out of it and truly integrate this into your event experience. For us, we did that. I think it drove the benefit we wanted and ultimately made it, cost justifiable.
I love it. I think the overlap point is really important whenever adopting any technology, whether it's event technology or like a new CRM. So a lot of times these have extra features that you're utilizing. People go, oh, I don't want to adopt that. Well, if you eliminate that one cost, it kind of, oh, hey, maybe I can afford it now.
That's right.
I also think one thing that, I obviously, I think a lot of people will say this is look at the revenue potentially with this technology or any technology. And when you were talking about the data you're getting about how many people are going to booths, imagine if you knew what the most popular booths were, and you could go to that booth and be like, by the way, you were the most popular booth. You brought in 4,000 people to your booth. All of a sudden you're going to sell them instantly to signing up for a booth next year. Whereas before you're just like, oh, I felt like you were popular because you're big or whatever it was. I'm just thinking the revenue potential for trade shows alone is huge. And I'm sure there's other ways to do it too. Sponsored areas, all that sort of stuff. So,
well, maybe, but there's also something I think therapeutic for any meeting planner to be able to respond to a partner that didn't like the traffic, where you hold up a sheet of paper and say, Let me disagree with you. Look at your traffic. Yeah. And we certainly are doing that. There's a lot of discipline, though. Back to I think it was Reed that asked the question about privacy. I can't remember. But, there's some discipline with this, too. There's no question that there is almost untapped or unlimited revenue potential for this. But if you cross that line, if you hit that tipping point to where you've violated your members or your attendees' privacy, you'll see a backlash. And there's probably more than a couple things going on right now with data protection that people are even more sensitive to. But that's something you got to be careful with. And so that's where I think that understanding how you use the data, understanding when it's okay to use personal data, when it's okay to use aggregate data, is going to be important to make this successful for multiple fronts of your event.
Awesome. Well, I know we're going a little bit close over time, so we got to wrap up. Otherwise, you guys are never going to get back to work with all the questions we're getting in from everybody. But I think it was just absolutely amazing conversation. So we got to kind of wrap up, though. So if you guys had to pick one tip for event planners in 2018 to make their events better, whether it's related to data or audience engagement, anything at all, what would be your one tip for event planners moving forward? You want to kick it off, Victor?
Yeah, I'm going to try to slyly roll two into one. So, I guess I'm not going to get away with it if I tell you I'm doing it. So I'd say it's a couple things. First, with anything, I would argue if you spend half the time focusing on engagement strategies that most groups do on sheer growth, I think you'll find that both will happen. And all I mean by that is, we spend so much time in this business, tracking numbers. How many attendees did we have last year? How many attendees do we have this year? Okay, it's all important. It really is. focus on what those attendees are doing. Focus on creating those engagement strategies and deploying those engagement strategies, and just trying to do one thing a bit differently. That brings me to a second point, and I mentioned this. Technology is great, and technology, I'm a huge believer in it. I love being an early adopter of things, but let's recognize technology is an enabler. It's a means, it's not the end. And I think you've got to put a lot of thought into how that technology is being used on site. And that was, to me, what made our group successful with Klik. And so I think there's a discussion thread that we had that talked about what was the planning for this. We did have a team on this, and we had a person that was assigned to understanding the Klik experience. And I don't think we missed a step. And we didn't miss a step when it came to describing it from the main stage with our signage, making sure that this became very quickly, it was very comfortable for our attendees. So don't ever underestimate the human impact of all this, because without it, it's just going to be another technology.
Yeah. I go in the same lines, like not tech for tech, it has to be built in the concept. And I think this is what Victor has done very well is tech was there, it's been used, but it's really the concept. And it all made sense when people are part of the game, part of the concept. It's being explained. So it's the human factor. I would say if you want to use tech at your event, think about it more broadly. It's not an add-on. It should be at the foundation of what you're trying to accomplish with your event. Either it is to measure the success, or if it's to generate engagement, but build it in your concept, not just add it to your event.
All right, guys. Well, like Will said, we got to start wrapping it up. So real quick as we roll here towards the end of the show, Victor, let's start with you. Do you have any new and cool resources that you want to share? Websites, blogs, books, gadgets, life hack? It doesn't have to be specific to events. Anything new and cool that you want to share with the audience?
Well, I tell you what, I will. I hadn't really thought about it, but the book I just finished reading, it's called Thank You for Being Late, Thomas Friedman. I'd encourage everyone to check it out. I mean, I think a couple of things that came from that book that fascinating to me, it's this concept about technology and just the sheer pace of technology adoption, because it builds on itself. But the human reluctance to adopt those types of technologies is fascinating. And it really kind of crystallizes what we're facing from an engagement perspective. And even Charles talked about so much of the technology that we'd like to see down the road. It exists today, but quite honestly, are we ready for it? So I would say check out that book. It has nothing to do with events. It has nothing to do with event planning. But when you start to look for ways to innovate and you think about it, it really brings you back to that human element. It's very important.
Well, Victor Bohnert, Innovatis Group, where can people find out more about you and what you're up to and ask you those questions after the show?
Yeah, so I am open book. Happy to take any questions on that. The website's www.innovatisgroup.com, or just email me. It's easy. It's victor@innovatisgroup.com. All
right, Charles, any resources for the audience?
For me, it's something that's been stuck in my mind since I've read the book, but it's no book, but it's how Google works. But it's been driving me in terms of product management. So building product that people will use and adopt, one, but it's keeping in mind that what's the technical insights that you have that you're going to make different than what everyone else can do. So that's something that we kept in mind. We don't want to do me too's. For me, is I want to see what else we do different than anyone, and how can we reinvent doing the same thing, but with a twist. I want to have our flavor in there. I want to have our technical insights in there. So it's been bugging my mind, but I think it's something that should bug everyone's mind.
Nice.
Don't do a me too. Do something else better.
And where can people find out more from you and PixMob?
Me and PixMob. PixMob, it's www.pixmob.com. The Klik product line, most definitely, we have our own brand and website, which is klik.co. And people can reach out to me easily at ct@klik.co.
Nice. Well, thanks guys again for joining us. And Will, thank you for helping me pull through this.
Thanks for having me.
where can folks find out more about Endless?
Oh, you guys all know where to find us. HelloEndless.com. Just always crunching away, putting out that good content,
Nice. And I'm Brant Kruger with Event Technology Consulting. We want to remind you that EventIcons is recorded live each Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You can watch behind the scenes on Facebook Live. Not today. We had some technical issues. Zoom wasn't cooperating with the Facebook Live feed, but we try to be there. That's why we call that behind the scenes, right? That's the behind the scenes feed, because really where the best place to watch is at event-icons.com. You can sign up for the Zoom where you can join us live. All of the great folks that joined us live today, there was Arlene and Phil and Reed and Susan and Vincent and all the other people that joined us live today. Thank you so much for joining us live. So sign up there at event-icons.com so you can get all the show notes, the links to the resources we just shared. It's also available, of course, as a podcast. You can, it's released the following Tuesday on iTunes and Pocket Casts and Stitcher and Google Play and whatever your favorite podcast app is. If it's not on a service, let us know because we want to be where you want to listen. We also want to know what you think. Use Twitter, use the hashtag EventIcons, join the EventIcons Facebook group, and let us know who you think the icons of the event industry are, who they should be. That the dog is barking, so that means it's time to go. So let us know what icons you want to be on the show. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next week on the next edition of EventIcons.
Thank you for joining us for another amazing episode of #EventIcons. To catch the transcription and all of the resources mentioned, head to www.helloendless.com/blog. This week's episode will be posted and available by next Tuesday. Also, let us know what you thought about this week's episode. Share your biggest takeaway and join the social conversation. Sponsored by Little Bird Told Media. Just tag your post with #EventIcons. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on #EventIcons.